BBC have been trying to launch Radio 2 Xtra. This is alongside some other radio launches, Radio 1 Anthems and BBC Radio 3 Unwind. It had a bit of trouble, though. So a lot of pushback to the Radio 2 Xtra initial findings, and Ofcom said the BBC should go back and have another look. One of the people pushing back was Phil Riley, the chief executive of Boom Radio, a station for over 65s. One of the things the BBC has said is that the new station will have 60% speech. What do you think of that, Phil?
I think this 60% is a bit of smoke and mirrors. The way I've read it, and I could be wrong, they may come back and say, no, Phil, it's going to be more Radio 4 than Radio 4. The way I read it, what it meant was 60% of the hours, there'll be somebody who will talk in them. I.e. 40% of the time it'll be non-stop music, and 60% of the time somebody will occasionally say something. I do not think for a moment that they're proposing to have 60% of their output being yabba yabba.
It sounds like you're not convinced with their new proposals.
I think they're what's silk purse sousy. They actually headline their changes. They say the major change will be the fact that we will do news bulletins, which are going to be simulcast from an existing source, i.e. the existing Radio 2 news bulletins. That they have headlined themselves as their major change. So I do not believe this whole speech thing. I think that they've put two bits of speech lines together, and people are adding the two together and getting 7 or 8, because they put a line about 60% of the hours will be speech led, and then they've said we'll include documentaries, which will be 55% music, 45% speech, and people are adding those two things together and thinking that this is something that it's not. It will still be a radio station playing the same music that Boom Radio plays, but without commercials and with all the backing of the BBC. It will not be offering any public service that is not already present in the market.
So in their document, they would obviously disagree with you. They talk a lot about the changes in consumption and opportunities to give licence fee payers better value for their money. I thought it was interesting, and the industry's been talking a lot about these spin-offs. Radio 1 Anthems and Radio 3 Unwind have launched. This big discussion is about whether those stations and this one go on DAB next year. Were you surprised that they sort of went ahead with it at all? Because Ofcom basically said, please go back and have another look. They could have just gone, OK, we're fine with Radio 1 Anthems and Radio 3 Unwind. Were you surprised that the 2 Xtra is still on the agenda?
I wasn't surprised. I was disappointed. I think we thought there's a moderate chance that they will properly think again and not do it. But maybe 1 in 4, 1 in 5 chance that they would have stopped it. I think they are really going to struggle here because Ofcom's initial view, based on their proposal just to go online, was that it was going to take 5% off our audience. Now, from what I can see of the numbers, and you need to sit there with a wet towel around your head really and do a lot of work on it, but the BBC seem to think that the whole proposal will only take 10% off our audience. Now, that seems inordinately low as a number to me, given the similarity between Boom and this Radio 2 proposal. Our own numbers, which went into our document, were 39%. Ofcom's 5% for online only would equate to 35% for the whole thing if you add, multiply one number by another. I won't do the maths. But Ofcom's initial number was very close to our initial number, a long way away from theirs. And even on their number, they say, to quote them, this proposal will significantly hamper the financial performance of Boom Radio. Well, if even the BBC, who are putting a Panglossian dressing over all of this, say it's going to significantly hamper us, what do you think the reality is? The reality is a lot worse than they might be saying in a public document.
I mean, there's a broader question. I mean, obviously, it affects you, and you are at the coalface. But the BBC shouldn't be frozen in aspect, should it? Shouldn't it have the ability to cater for licence fee payers with new services? You've done well, but they've got a bigger opportunity to reach more licence fee payers.
Well, first of all, the BBC supposedly said its strategy was going to be digital first. It was going to be podcast, online, on-demand stuff. It wasn't going to launch any more services. They've suddenly had a change of heart on that and seem to be going back on a on a vision that they had.
But isn't that good? That means they're fleet of foot. Isn't that what we want from our public broadcaster?
Not if all they're going to do is to propose services which simply ape what the commercial sector is already doing, free of charge to the license fee payer. Right? No one's having to pay for what we do. No one's having to pay for what Global or Bauer do, but they do have to pay for the BBC, and the BBC is strapped for cash and shouldn't be spending it on doing stuff that is already being done by the commercial sector. You know, because you've talked about it on this show, the massive cuts that are taking place across the board at the BBC, particularly with regard to local radio and other services. At a time when that's going on, for them to be frittering money on this is really quite outrageous.
So just before we go, what's the next stages of this? So that they've submitted this to Ofcom. Can anyone reply? And I'm sure you'll be replying to their new proposals.
There's a short window for people to say whether or not Ofcom should do a big test or a smallish test, but everybody, I think, expects Ofcom are going to do the big test, but they've just got to go through this hurdle. So there's a small hurdle of about 6 weeks when they ask for initial thoughts, and then Ofcom will do a full formal review, which will take most of the first half of next year, which is a delightful extra 6 months of my life and David Lloyd's life that we'll be spending arguing with the BBC. Oh, joy.